So cannot emphasize how important that code is. So get the right code. So for those of you in Lloyd's, you're not L, you're S for syndicate. For those of you insurance carriers that are multi-platform, you know, please make sure that you know which hat you're wearing. Okay. Wonderful question in from a broker. Triumph of hope over experience. The point, although I joke, the point raised by the broker is a very, very important point. In a lot of the brokers now use batch systems, and the concept of a batch system is basically where the broker's system is effectively hardwired into the class database and into the IMR, and so data effectively spits straight from the broker's system into class rather than, you know, individuals sitting there typing. And the point raised by this broker, a very, very valid one, is it causes them a complete nightmare to have SCAP at the front of the loss name. When will ECF or class have an indicator introduced to identify SCAP and the leader identity? Never. I can say that with some certainty. There will be no changes done to ECF absent or before the delivery of the new integrated claims platform. Yeah, I don't have any inside track, but I can absolutely say that that is going to be the case. Okay, right. So Kim from the IUA, who would have an inside track, hopefully is going to come up with a slightly more thoughtful answer. Well, it says typing. All right, you're going to talk instead.
Oh yeah, sorry. I do have audio, so I'm just going to sit here blinded by the sun, as you can probably tell. Yeah, all of these things are being considered for the new infrastructure and the new services being delivered through the joint venture. We did consider trying to make them happen in the current infrastructure, and it got very complicated very quickly. And especially now that there is an entirely new set of services to be delivered, it would seem backwards to dedicate resource to fixing something which we're hoping not to be around for much longer. Mm-hmm. So that's the most concise answer I can give, is that all of these things will form part of the new claims platform.
Yeah. Another good point coming up from somebody about what about a non-bureau slip leader that's not UK on their stamp, but also has ILU, Lloyd's and or Lerma. So again, let's think about any of our company market carriers around the table. So the key thing is that you're not going to have an overseas slip leader unless that entity is a UK authorized insurer. Okay, so if we just think about, I don't know, let's just pick at random on SCOR. I don't know if you've got anybody from SCOR around the table. So if you think about SCOR Paris, then SCOR Paris as that legal entity is probably not a UK authorized insurer. So whilst they could agree to be bound by SCAP, they cannot be the SCAP slip leader. SCOR UK, I don't know, I haven't asked the compliance people, but I assume is probably a UK authorized insurer, so they can be the slip leader. And this, oh, there we are. Oh, thank you, Stephen. Good to know you're in the room. Right. So the key thing is particularly for those of you who have got, let's say, a number of members of your family corporately, the brokers need to be really clear, and also the insurers need to be really, really clear about which member of the family is involved. And so if we've got SCOR UK, they are a UK authorized entity. They can be a slip leader under SCAP. SCOR Paris, they can be bound by SCAP, but they cannot be the slip leader. And of course, you know, what you could have is a scenario for whatever reason where you might actually have two lines on the slip, you know, business that's not particularly European, where actually London and Paris choose to write a line that's not out of the realms of possibility. Okay, so subject to that very important but certainly unresolvable point that was raised earlier about where the SCAP indicator needs to be. At the moment, the blue tack and string requires it to be the leading characters in the lost name and to have a gap before any bit of lost name that is still able to be put in that. Okay. So, first advice, broker looking at the claim, going, okay, I think it's SCAP as the broker. I would like to ask, present it to the market as a SCAP claim. And obviously, as for the brokers around the room, you need to just be thinking about, okay, what's the financial value, including potential? Think about it on a net basis. If it's in other than GBP, do that calculation to the Bank of England spot rate. If you are using a non-bureau slip leader, so for example, Lloyd's Insurance Company, then make sure that your communications that you've had with them already are loaded into ECF. Now, one of the questions that's been raised before is, well, what do we do as a broker if the non-bureau slip leader is a really slow communicator? We don't want to get ourselves in trouble by not notifying the London market because we're waiting for them. I absolutely recognize that. The reality is, though, is that this process depends on your colleagues at Exchanging being able to do something on the basis of what the SCAP slip leader has said. Being slightly cynical, I would say that if you end up with a badly responding SCAP slip leader that's non-bureau, you might not use them again. The last point is really, really important as well. And again, it's part of the string and blue tag. That if, as a broker, you're putting the claim down, say, let's keep it simple, the Lloyd's and the Lerma pipelines, then in non-SCAP world, you know that you can have dislocated transactions. So you might have 10 transactions for the Lerma market, 2 transactions for the Lloyd's market. A lot of the time they're aligned, but you can get dislocation. The dislocation is not particularly problematic. It is very problematic in SCAP. The transactions need to remain aligned because otherwise it just causes real issues with trying to keep a sort of harmonious presentation and a harmonious status across all the markets. We will talk about query in a moment, but that's why, if at all possible, particularly as the slip leader, if you've got a problem with the presentation, try in the first instance to pick up the phone or email the broker, and of course the usual thing of a plea to all parties around the table to respond to messages. So the next really important point is that whilst the broker is going to look and see whether the claim is eligible for SCAP and to present it as SCAP, it's not their final decision about whether it stays like that. That rests with the slip leader. Okay, so broker has put forward the claim as SCAP. So now let's say we have got, well, let's have Score Syndicate as the leader. So the slip leader, so Score Syndicate as a slip leader, we will have Generali as the Lerma bureau leader, and we will have one of the Aspen companies as the IUA bureau leader. So it's going to appear in everybody's to-do list, but everybody's going to look at it and go, all right, that's saying SCAP S. So those of us in Lerma and those of us in IUA, we don't need to touch it. Once the Lloyd's guys have done what they need to do, Exchanging will do the rest. So our colleagues from Score Syndicate Claims team look at it and they go, actually, no, we don't believe it is eligible for SCAP. And there could be a number of reasons for this. There could be that, even though it's not got a big reserve at the moment, that it's going to go woof. You might have run a sanctions check and it's come up with a positive hit. You might just feel that there's something about the facts of the case that you go, actually, do you know what? No. So the key thing there is, well, what do you do next? Well, please don't hit the query button in ECF. Okay, ring the broker up, email the broker, say, I don't think it's SCAP eligible because, and it might be a conversation, that's fine. Nobody else is going to touch that transaction while it's still holding a SCAP indicator. If the broker agrees with the position, then what the broker can do is go back into the class database, either via their own system or directly, take off the SCAP indicator. re-release all the transactions. Now it appears looking like a non-SCAP claim in everybody's to-do list. So the Lloyd's market, they know that they need to deal with it. Generali, as the Lerma lead, go, right, now I know I now need to touch it now. And anybody, for example, at Aspen for the ILU side knows they need to touch it. And it is important to understand, as I said right at the beginning, that a claim can start its life as SCAP and then be thrown out of the process. And the reason for that is typically because the reserve has gone woof, or something has come out of left field that makes the claim more complicated. Hopefully things like sanctions checks and stuff would be done reasonably early. The other important dynamic that a lot of people don't necessarily think about is, what is the role of the slip leader if you have a claim presented to you that you think actually is eligible for SCAP, and you don't, well, you can see that the broker has not set it up as a SCAP claim. Now, it is entirely within your gift as the slip leader. And actually, if you read the detail of the guidelines, it has actually an expectation on you that you would go, right, I think this claim is eligible for the use of SCAP. Get in touch with the broker to get them to, again, go back into the class database or their system if it's batch, set it up with SCAP coding on it and re-release. All I would say is that, yes, very much please do think about that. But the danger with that, of course, is if as a slip leader, you don't get to a transaction for, I don't know, let's say 3 days, what might have happened is that other markets on it, quite reasonably, going, well, okay, fine, it's not a SCAP claim, I'm the Lerma leader, I can respond to it, will have already responded to it. Is that irresolvable? No, it's not irresolvable, but basically what's going to happen is the whole lot has to be sort of scrapped and start again, okay, because you've then got mismatch in the transactions. So, broker says, I think it's SCAP. Slip leader says, I think it's SCAP. Slip leader now, whether that be in the Lloyd's market, the Lerma market, or the ILU market, looks at it and deals with it as if they were dealing with any other claim. They respond to it in ECF in the normal way. But then the key thing is everybody else leaves it alone. And literally, one of the biggest problems that causes the robots to have a hiccup is because people aren't leaving it alone. You can clearly see from your workflow that it says SCAP L, you're a syndicate, you don't have any Lerma part of your family, and you just go, it's in my workflow, therefore I must have to deal with it. No, the only reason it's in your workflow is because of the almost total lack of connectivity between the 3 versions of ECF. Okay, so the broker has to do that, has to shove it down all the pipelines. And then the other really, really important thing is if it says SCAP NB, doesn't matter if you're Lloyd's, your Lerma, or the ILU, just leave it alone. Leave it alone, and the guys at Exchanging will deal with it. So, talked a lot about them with them looking at me, which is even nicer. So the key thing is that they will respond for everybody else that is not the slip leader, okay? Now, for those of you on the Lloyd's side, exactly the same as normal. The guys at Exchanging will put data into the XCS class system. The overnight SCMs will come out. But what is slightly different is that there will be SCAP used as a cause code, so you can clearly see that. But the other really important thing is the SCAP notification report. The SCAP notification report comes out to the market, and it's really important because it tells those not directly involved with the claim what's going on. So let's talk about the notification report. So it's daily. It's not cumulative. So what it's going to do is say, this is what happened yesterday, effectively. Now, what this allows you to do is see what's going on if you're not the slip leader, and allows you to do your own sanctions checks as well. Obviously, one of the responsibilities of the leaders is to do sanctions checks, and most definitely pull the claim out of SCAP if they get a positive hit. But also, you know, your own regulatory reporting, whatever that might be, but also things like Medicare as well allows you to identify those claims. So you will see there, it'll be sent to any bureau leaders that are not slip leader. So if the slip leader is MB, it'll be sent to Lloyd's, Lerma and ILU slip leaders, bureau leaders. Anybody that is following Generali as our Lerma leader, you will get it. And then also it'll come through to the ILU and Lerma slip leaders, okay? So the key thing, of course, is just to make sure within your own organization that this report is arriving, and more importantly, that somebody's doing something with it. So I've talked a lot about the robot, which makes it sound very impersonal. I have no idea whether it's got a human face or not, but it's important to understand what it does, okay? So the minute slip leaders agree transactions, what's going to happen is that activity, that claim, is now going to form part of a report that goes to the robot. And the robot acts a bit like a croupier. And the robot says, I can deal with this one, I can't deal with this one, I can deal with this one, I can't deal with this one. And so the things that it says I can't deal with them are things like where it's slip lead NB. So that's not, it can't deal with it because anybody's done anything wrong. That's just the way that it's been set up. So anything where it's slip lead NB, boof, I need a human, because the robot can't read the slip lead's comments, which might be in a Word document in the IMR. Yeah, it's really as simple as that. Now, it also has to throw to its human friends Lerma Bureau Lead First Advices. So this is where the overall slip lead is in, say, the Lloyd's market. So the robot says, right, okay, right, the Lerma market doesn't have to intellectually engage with this. But again, it's just a fact of the technology, because at Lerma First Advice, there are mandatory fields about business class and subclass and all of that stuff that have to be filled in. Human needs to do that and make those decisions about what categories should be used. And then, and I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, problems with the SCAP lost name, okay? So where the robot can handle it, the robot will be checking for documents also at policy level and a claims level, because of course, remember that an ECF transaction is not valid if there are no documents. Okay, so if it's throwing it towards its human friends, that's what we call the exception list. So other things on the exception list are also you not leaving it alone, the failure to actually add documents, and then also where anybody has queried, so that's the Lloyd's functionality, or infed or pended, which is the company market functionality. The other thing that you do find sometimes is that the SCAP lost name changes between presentations, which is a bit weird. So what will the humans be doing? Well, the humans, as I said, will be looking for the non-lead broker comments, and then, as I've said, completing those mandatory fields, and then also agreeing, circulating and agreeing for all of the Lerma following market. So if you're the leader, so I'm just aware we need to crack on. We've been talking about a lot of things. So as a SCAP leader, you can deal with a claim from cradle to grave. You can decline the claim, but if you think that it is a declinature that may be contentious, this might be the time to take it out of SCAP, okay? You can handle bordereau. The bordereau, again, not binders, because SCAP can't be used on binders, but line slip bordereau, the bordereau aggregate number can be as high as you like, but the individual claims on the bordereau have got to be within tolerance. And then if there are loss funds or escrows being used, again, on non-binder business, then again, they can be handled, because it doesn't matter if they're over 250,000 sterling, it's because this is admin and org, this is not claims decision making. We've talked about exiting SCAP. Absolutely, at any point, the broker can say, I don't believe this is a SCAP claim anymore. But a lot of the time, it will be the slip leader going, do you know what, actually, something's happened. We've talked about this already. Now, if it's at a point where something's come into the slip leader and they're going, actually, no, just take it out of SCAP now, What the broker can do if nobody has touched any of the buttons in ECF is to just go back into class, take the SCAP coding out, re-release the transactions, and all of a sudden now it will appear to everybody in the market as normal claims rules. Now, the key thing, of course, is that those normal claims rules means that those leaders in the markets that were not the intellectual slip leader are going to have to start reading into a claim fairly quickly, but hopefully a slip leader would be supportive in that area and sort of catch people up. It is possible to take a claim out of normal claims rules and put it into SCAP, okay? But of course, what you're doing there is you are heavily compressing the number of decision makers. So that cannot be done unilaterally. That must be done clearly and equivocally with the agreement of all the, shall we call it, traditional agreement parties. And the key there is that must be really, really carefully documented on the file. So let's just have a few FAQs. So for brokers, can you have dislocated transactions? Please don't. We've talked about how to remove the claim from SCAP, and particularly in the realm of parallel fees, can they be SCAP? Yes, they can, but the main entry must also be SCAP, okay? One of the queries that came up from an expert last time we did this session was, well, why can't all parallel fees be SCAP? And my answer to that is, well, I don't disagree with that being as a sensible concept, but that's not within the rules, I'm afraid. For ILU, if you're looking at it as an ILU leader and you can see that the second ILU has been ticked perhaps before, then get rid of it. And, you know, common sense, things like sanctions, things like Medicare, get it out of SCAP. For those of you on the LRMA side, you've got a lead reserve field, obviously visible to the broker, but not visible to anybody else. And by that, I mean not visible to Lloyd's, not visible to ILU. So I would say really try and avoid using it, okay? Now, one of the things that's important is as a LRMA follower, you've got a window, it's a small window, but it is a window, whereby if you have a problem with something that's been done on your behalf by the LRMA leader, you can interject and block things, but very, very short window. One of the toggles that you will see on LRMA ECF is something called contractual condition applies. Its normal default position is no. For SCAP, leave it as no. If you are the LRMA leader, leave it as no. On the Lloyd's side, you also have lead reserve fields. Now here, use them, please, if you want to explode the broker's reserve into constituent parts, so indemnity and fees. Please do not use it to override a broker's reserve, because if you are the slip leader, your overriding, yes, that's the word, will not be visible to anybody else. Okay, so please don't do that. Same point about sanctions and Medicare, and then just be aware that there's still those mandatory fields in ECF that you will have to deal with. From the comments perspective, public comments remain visible to everybody, including the broker. And just remember, the private comments are effectively market specific. Now, queries. If, for example, a slip leader is not getting a response from a broker to something, then they may well end up using the query functionality in their version of ECF, whether it be query or inf or pen. Now, if that happens, then for anybody that's getting the notification report, that line item will show the OQ indicator to show that it has been queried. But ideally, please just don't use that functionality, because there is a danger that we would then get dislocation of the transactions. So just to summarize some of those problems, okay, why might the wheels fall off? It's not coded properly. The numbers are too big. And that goes back to a question that was asked very early. And if you remember, Karen said the robot cannot check the numbers. Okay, it's not going to block something just because something's above 250,000. And that's because primarily of bordereaux being eligible for line slips. People not touching or not leaving it alone. Brokers, please always remember to load the NB leader comments. as they're dislocating the transactions and different SCAP names. So you've already been sent the clause, the guidance notes. We did a full, quite lengthy FAQ document when we did the session under the auspices of the LNG, and that's still available and will be circulated. So last polling question, please, Tony. While we're waiting for people to vote, one of the questions that was posed ahead of time that I certainly can't answer is, are there statistics available about usage and sort of success and stuff like that at class of business level? Do you have that sort of statistics, Karen?
We should be able to obtain it, I would have thought.
Yeah.
I'll take it and find out.
Yeah, as I said, it might be a case of if there is appetite to have that sort of visibility at CAB level. Yeah, we know obviously that there are different classes of business where there is a higher potential of claims, having a better use of SCAP, whether it be aviation baggage claims or small travel claims or small cargo claims, but then equally a whole population where potentially not. Okay, so we've got a few votes in. So let's see what some of the answers are, please, Tony. Okay, so higher limits is a recurring theme, and as I've said, the claim scheme on the Lloyd's side is being revised with higher limits going in for the tick over between standard and complex. So I think in that context, I think a conversation should probably be had around this as well. Whether it would go to different limits for different areas of the market, who knows? But I think the really, really important thing is to actually make sure that your voice is heard. So for those of you that are brokers, talk to your reps at Lever. For those of you in the company market, talk to Tom and the team at the IUA. For those of you in the Lloyd's market, then talk to Janine and the claims team at the LMA. Because not making any promises, but it's only by having the voice, as it were, that these changes can be considered. So a bit of a roller coaster way through. For our Generali friend who wants to chat with me offline, absolutely, I'll do that. So hopefully IUA don't shut me out of the meeting until I've captured their email address. We've still got the chat and we've still got the Q&A open. We've still got no time at all. So anybody got any more questions or points that they want to raise before we let you go about your rightful business?
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And I'll just jump in to give anyone who has a question the opportunity to pose it. I think we've probably got about 10 minutes before the session is due to close at 4:30. I would certainly reiterate the request for class of business level SCAP statistics, and actually, some of the broader SCAP statistics that might be made available to to some specific groups. I'm sure that we would like to push those out a little bit more widely across our underwriting and claims committees. There's always quite a bit of interest around SCAP uptake and how that's evolving. And then, Charlotte, if I may, just to chip in on the question of a higher limit, you're absolutely right in that, from our perspective as well, it has been a theme of discussion over the last couple of years. One of the key points that has emerged from some of our members is that they would really like to have, a bit more comfort that SCAP is being used correctly and as intended by all stakeholders in the market. And that isn't to point the finger at any one group of participants. It is that in general, they think that the use of SCAP needs to improve. And that's exactly why we are putting on this kind of session. And hopefully in time, that comfort can be gained. And then, of course, that SCAP limit can be pushed up, because clearly that would be in the benefit of all parties if SCAP is being used as intended.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And certainly, some of you certainly on the Lloyd's side might have some visibility of the proposed changes to the standard and complex levels, and they are quite substantial increases. So there's certainly a willingness, I think, within the Lloyd's community to countenance, tolerate, whatever word you want to use, you know, one pair of eyes on some much larger claim sizes. But of course, SCAP is not just a Lloyd's market, it's a cross-market thing. And so there must be, of course, agreement from all stakeholders to that.
Just to put my voice in, when dealing with SCAP as well, you were talking about the SCAP loss name. When we are dealing with, like, say, SCAP S, we find that some brokers are loading Lerma and ILU entries as SCAP S, but no Lloyd's transaction, and we can't process without the corresponding SCAP prefix entry. So if there is a SCAP S but the Lloyd's can't be raised for whatever reason, we can't touch that under SCAP.
Yeah, and I think a really interesting thing that I've seen, Kirsty, coming out from at least one broker in the past, is that their internal systems generate slightly different references for the Lloyd's market, the ILU, and the Lerma market, and so you end up with this dislocation where you can't see across the whole claim what's going on. So a question that's come in from somebody saying, can fee collection agencies use SCAP? I'm seeing several fee collections on claims where the actual claim was handled under SCAP on a parallel UCR and the fee collection isn't. Absolutely, a fee collector can set up their parallel fee entry as SCAP or request that it is handled as SCAP. But there's two things that are important to that. Firstly, somebody needs to tell them that the main claim is SCAP, and that's either got to be the main broker or the leader, because if they don't know, they can't do it. The key thing that the fee collectors, and I don't know if we have any of them around the table, or the experts collecting their own fees, they cannot set up, well, I mean, they can set it up, it should be bounced, a parallel fee entry as SCAP if the main claim is not. Okay, so the key with the parallel fees is that the fee collectors or the experts collecting their own fees need to know the status of the main claim.
And Charlotte, if I may, just to move backwards slightly onto a point that you covered probably only about 10 minutes ago now, but the mention of sanctions. And the reason I wanted to raise it is because I know we have had some specific questions raised, obviously incredibly topical at the moment, and as it should be, and as it typically always is, sanctions is very high up on the list and areas of focus. So can you give us a practical example of how in reality a sanction concern would be identified and whose obligation or requirement it will be to ensure that a SCAP, a sanction claim, doesn't make its way through the SCAP process inadvertently?
Yeah, absolutely. So every single carrier sitting around this table should have their own internal sanctions checking process. And for example, a lot of them, it doesn't matter whether they're Lloyd's or companies, will now be using, for example, claims management systems. We all know, DocuSoft and Guidewire, people like that, SQL. And so a lot of them have actually got inbuilt sanction checking in there, but it doesn't matter what mechanisms are used. One of the primary responsibilities of a SCAP slip leader, right from early doors, is to consider whether a sanctions check needs to be run on that claim. Now, for things like marine claims or aviation claims, that type of stuff, a lot of the time the risk itself, of course, it is not in any way, shape or form a problem. It is something to do with the circumstances of a claim. A ship's broken down in the Persian Gulf, it's had to go into an Iranian port for repairs. The Iranians have been terribly hospitable, but Iranian ports tend to be owned by the Iranian government. So if we're going to be paying them for our stay, we're paying a sanctioned entity. So the starting point is that the responsibility rests with the SCAP slip leader to do appropriate sanctions checks. The second responsibility is if there is a hit, and of course that could be a positive or a false positive, to then take steps. And the most important step at that point is to take the claim out of SCAP. Because I mean that's a classic example of where you just need to get it into a scenario where everybody can be, you know, looking after them, well, back to the normal, you know, Lloyd's and company market agreement. The other key thing about the SCAP notification report and why it's important that somebody in every organization is looking at it quickly is it allows, particularly LRMA followers, who of course in the normal circumstance are masters of their own destiny, to do their own internal checks and, if necessary, block particularly settlements. Okay. Now, the guys at Exchanging, and again, I'll look to Karen for guidance on this, I know have got a lot of their own sanctions and compliance checks and balances that go on. How does that fit in with the work you do on SCAP, if at all?
For SCAP, obviously, when we're looking for any other bureau, we're not looking at sanctions in any context at all. We're only looking at sanctions when we're doing the TP process inside of it. So when we're looking at the agreement, yeah, so when we're looking at agreement, we're not touching the sanctions side at all. It would just be at the TP level that we invoke our sanctions checks.
Okay, so effectively in terms of the large majority of the SCAP role, the Exchanging sanctions team won't get involved. Yeah, so it's all with the slip leader.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, Karen, and for your explanation, Charlotte. So maybe one final thought from me, and obviously we'll see if anything more comes through for the last 2 or 3 minutes. But we had one of our committee meetings probably last week now. Our junior aviation claims group got together, a really good group that we've had for about a year now, and you know they are incredibly interested in this topic. And I wondered if maybe Charlotte and Karen and Kirsty, feel free to chime in, if there are any key points that you would draw out, summary points for claims handlers in particular, just 2 or 3 takeaways at the very end to really push home. What would you advise them to be cognizant of?
I think the key thing for me is it falls into 2 categories, and I'll take the second one first, which is in terms of any young aviation claims professional looking to handle a claim as the SCAP slip leader. They should do it in exactly the same way as they would do if they were handling in any other context. Okay, and in some ways actually not to be frightened of their own shadow and suddenly think, oh my God, we're spending everybody else's money. If they're capable of making those decisions, then they should continue to do that. The second point is just being very, very clear about the mechanics of SCAP, about what makes it eligible, what makes it ineligible, all of those things, and just being mindful about, just those really sort of simple process steps around, okay, it's in my workflow, is it for me to handle? I think a lot of people get their knickers in a knot, and that's a very technical term, about SCAP. In terms of being the intellectual slip leader, your decision making, your handling of that claim should be no different as if you were handling it just for your own interests. I mean, yes, you, I think, should be appropriately mindful about the fact that you've got nobody else behind you to pick up the mess if you get it wrong. But then equally, why shouldn't that stop you just asking questions from your peers in the office around that? I mean, for me, I think it's an incredibly good training ground on that sort of smaller, more simple claim to really sort of, earn your stripes as a claims professional.
Absolutely, no, that's incredibly useful. Thank you, Charlotte. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I think it's probably the opportunity now for me to wrap up and say a couple of thanks, and of course note a few pieces of information for people to be aware of. So as I said at the start, we will be circulating the slides and a link to the recording along with the various materials that Charlotte mentioned in the next few days. It takes a little while to process that, so please do bear with us. If you have got any questions for Charlotte, and I know Charlotte, you mentioned getting in touch with people in particular, I'm hoping that your email, Charlotte, may be in the presentation slides, and if not, we can of course send it on directly if you're happy for us to do so.
Oh, of course so, yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. That sounds like a plan. And if anybody has got any questions, comments, something that they think should be done to try and make this process a little bit better, please do, of course, let myself and Kim Darrington at IUA know, or any other IUA representative, and equally from a broking side, Liba, and on the Lloyd's side, LMA. And I'm sure Charlotte would be very keen to hear these types of comments as well. Do look out for the next regular SCAP training session, which, as I said, will most likely be in Q1 of next year. We've got a couple of interesting sessions coming up. We've spent a lot of time talking about the SCAP robot, and we've actually got a real life robot making its way into the IUA offices on Tuesday as we take a look at robotics and societal technological change, which should be an interesting event. And then Charlotte is back, I think, in a couple of weeks' time to do a cargo clauses workshop with the both the IUA and the International Cargo Insurance Conference. And I'll just need to check on the date there, Charlotte. But if anybody would be interested, that's what I was thinking. If anyone would be interested in attending, just drop myself or the IUA's events manager, Deb Finch, a note, and obviously be more than happy to send you the details.
Yeah, can't remember. Old-fashioned paper diary, can't find it.
Absolutely.
I'll be there.
Brilliant. And then as far as IUA training goes, we have a competition law session on the 24th of November. Again, all of these details will be available probably on our website and also directly via either myself or our events manager, Deb Finch. So the last thing for me to say is thank you very much to Charlotte, to Karen, and to Kirsty for an incredibly interesting session. I hope everyone enjoyed it and found it as useful as I did. And of course, thank you to everyone for giving up their time this afternoon. And we'll leave you to the rest of your afternoons and evenings. So thank you very much.